Number 1. Turn around. This happened when I was out with some friends of mine off the coast of Washington. My friend Todd had a really cool boat. I honestly don't know enough about boats to tell you what kind of boat it was or what you would even call it, but it was a decent sized boat. It was large enough for the 5 of us to be on more than comfortably, and it had an inner chamber with a small kitchen, bathroom, and even bunks to sleep on. It was a nice boat. Now, Todd liked being out on the ocean because he felt that it was the freest place that a person could be. He often would drive out to international waters to explore. I actually couldn't understand the desire to do that. Not only was getting too far away from the shore scary to me in the first place, but I'd heard that in international waters, there pretty much were not any laws. Whether or not this is true or not, I have no idea. I also didn't ask because I didn't want Todd to think I was an idiot. Later in the day on this outing, Todd was getting an itch, so to speak, to go out and explore further from the coast. I made some mild objections, but really didn't want to appear like too much of a wuss in front of my buddies, so I didn't object too strongly. For the most part, I figured Todd knew what he was doing, and I was a complete novice when it came to much of anything out on the water. We had been cruising along for quite a long time. Despite my fear of what was going on, I was sitting up front on the ship, enjoying the amazing view. The ocean was just enormous, and thinking about how large it was really even made me pretty dizzy. But it was pretty awesome. It had been a while since we had seen anything, but while I was sitting there watching, I did notice something moving up in the distance. I immediately called Todd's attention over to it. He told me it was just another boat and not to worry about it. It was probably just some other people doing the exact same thing that we were doing. He then, though, had the genius idea that it would be a good idea to go up and see what they were up to. Now, this I was against, and I had absolutely no problem indicating this to Todd. He, however, just brushed me off. It was his boat, and he was going to do what he wanted to do. So, we slowly headed off in the direction of that boat. Little by little, we came closer and closer to the ship. Todd was going slowly, I guess so as not to surprise the other boat. They hadn't really indicated that they had seen us. As we got closer, I noticed that this boat was not nearly as nice as Todd's was. It was about the same size, and looked like it had an inside compartment as well. And we figured it must have since we didn't see anybody on deck. It wasn't moving either. Now, you'll have to forgive me again if you're a boating person, but as I mentioned before, I really don't know anything about it. For me, it's turn the boat on and it goes vroom. When the boat gave no indication that it was aware that we were there, and because it seemed like it was adrift, Todd got a little more cautious. He tried to radio the other boat. He got nothing from them. Todd was worried that something might be wrong, so we approached the boat slowly. He had to keep a decent distance from it though, because the last thing any of us wanted was a collision. But Todd knew what he was doing, and he maneuvered us closer to the boat. I have to admit, this was a bit of a rush. I was worried that something bad had happened to whomever was in the boat, but the mystery of it was still very exciting. When we were very, very close to the boat, where we could have communicated as if someone was there, I noticed some movement on the boat. Suddenly, a very short man, I'd come right out and say a dwarf actually, but I really don't want to offend anyone, came running out on deck. He was the gnarliest looking man. He was dressed in ragged clothes, had a long and scraggly beard, and he only had one freaking arm. He was holding a knife in that hand, and it was obviously covered in blood. The little man began screaming at us in a nasty little voice. "Come closer, you motherfucker, so I can slice you up!" he screamed at us. He yelled some other obscenities too. Alarmed, I jumped back. When I did, I saw another man come on deck. He was much larger than the small man, and he was carrying a gun. He had a much different message for us than the dwarf had. The large man looked at us and simply commanded, "Turn the fuck around." The dwarf ran over to the wheel and started the engine, looking over at Todd as he did so. He obviously had different intentions than the big man had. I don't think Todd needed to be told twice. He got back in and turned the boat around, and we took off. Fortunately, even though it seemed like the dwarf wanted to come after us, Todd's boat was faster, and we lost them very quickly. He didn't slow down until the boat was completely out of sight, and we saw land again. I'm not really sure what to think about what happened. Todd was freaked out, but he later told me he thought it might have been a joke. I was shocked, and I asked him how he had come to that conclusion. He then told me if he had looked like a pirate, and was in a boat in the middle of nowhere, and had seen a group of people like us, he would have played a similar prank. I don't know. It scared the crap out of me, though.
I'm a fisherman from Long Island. My boat is not huge, and I'm not a full-time fisherman. I would never be able to make a living off of what I catch. But I make a little money off of it, and I wouldn't stop doing it for the world, because I really enjoy it. I had a very weird experience a few years ago, however, that made me a little hesitant to venture out for a couple days. I had a bad case of Murphy's Law, which led me into experiencing something pretty chilling. I went out fishing with my buddy Dan. I need at least one other person to man the boat, really. We had gone out pretty far because, well, you have to if you really want to catch anything. The water around New York, other than being terribly polluted in areas, just isn't rich in fish unless you stray pretty far out. First thing that went wrong, we kept having problems with our equipment all day. That should have been a warning signal to us, but it wasn't. Rather, we just treated it as a challenge. Second thing that went wrong, the fish were not biting at all. And I really mean at all. It was one of the worst days I've ever had when I've been out. Again, you'd think we would have given up and gone home, but we saw it as a challenge, to keep trying. We stayed out longer than we ever had before. Dan and I had been out for a very long time, and we had decided that once the sun began setting, that we needed to head back in for the night. That's when the third thing went wrong. The damn engine on my boat broke down. We tried to fix it or fiddle around with it, as it were, but there wasn't a whole lot that we could do. So we had to radio for help. Can you see where this is going? Fourth thing that went wrong. Our radio went on the fritz. It was just one thing after another. The sunset was beautiful, but it didn't last long enough for my taste. We were adrift in the ocean and had no way of communicating with anyone. I sent out an SOS signal, and at least that was working. But I didn't get a reply right away, so that was discouraging. With the darkness came the cold. That was a bit discouraging. We could go into the boat. It has an inside, but because we were adrift, we couldn't stay under and wait. We had to be on deck long enough to tell what was going on. We didn't need a big ship to come along or a small, less friendly boat without us knowing it. Plus, the possibility of hitting something was terrifying, too. At one point, though, when it was really cold, Dan and I both went below deck just to get warmed up for a few minutes. My lights were working fine, thank God. And we seemed to be pretty open water. So we took the time to go ahead and spend a few moments together keeping warm. About 5 minutes passed, and then something happened. My boat shook, and there was a loud noise, as if we had hit something. I immediately cursed myself for staying below deck for too long, because of course, that is what I thought would happen. The cracking sound and the reverberation of the hit wasn't severe, so it was likely just something like a buoy. But even a buoy could cause enough damage to sink a smaller boat. Even worse though, if something could have been worse, after the supposed collision sound, the lights in the boat and on deck all went off. If you've never experienced pitch dark away from the city, you won't be able to understand what happened. But it was dark, completely dark. Dan and I immediately got up and we knocked some things over. Fortunately, though, we were able to find the flashlight with much trouble. It was a big, heavy-duty flashlight. Once we could see a little bit, I told Dan to grab the lantern and get it lit and meet me on the deck. I had to run up and see if we had hit something. I ran up on deck and I immediately froze when I saw something I cannot explain to this day. Standing on the bow of the ship was a person. An honest-to-God person. He was dressed like a fisherman, as far as I could tell. But even when the flashlight shining on him, all I could see was a shadowy figure. But I could tell he was looking at me. But he didn't do anything. He just stood there. Dan ran up behind me with the lantern. As he did, he saw the figure standing there too, and he dropped the lantern as he yelled out in surprise. The lantern went out and we only had the light of the flashlight. I tried to talk to the strange figure, but as I opened my mouth, he leaned backwards and fell off the bow of the ship and into the water. Dan and I were terrified. We ran up the bow and tried to look over it, but it was too dark to see much of anything. We yelled for the guy, trying to get him to communicate with us so we could save him, but there was nothing. About 10 minutes after the man fell off the boat, the lights came back on. Not only that, but the engine started working again, and so did our radio. We used the spotlights to look in the water, but we were unable to find anything. There were no other boats, no buoys, and no man in the water. We drove the boat back to shore, and when we inspected it, there was no indication that it had hit anything. I can't explain what happened that night. I can't even begin to speculate on what that was, but I do know it was the scariest experience of my life.
Number 3. The Unknown. I don't really know if people who read this story will find it particularly scary, but it was pretty terrifying when it happened. I guess all I can ask is that you use your imagination and try to see what it would be like if this happened to you on a boat in the ocean. I have a decent-sized boat, not very large. It was actually a small fishing vessel, but I've never used it for that. I basically bought it because it was pretty cheap, and it served my purposes. My purposes being, I just wanted to be able to spend time out on the ocean with my wife. My wife and I were out one evening, and decided to stay out after dark. This was in the Atlantic Ocean. I'm sorry for not mentioning that beforehand. Normally, we didn't do this very often, but the sunset was beautiful that evening, filling the sky with the most beautiful shades of pink that I have ever seen. Once the sun had set, the moon was also beautiful, and there was just something about sitting on a boat in the middle of the ocean, watching the sky at night, which is just absolutely mesmerizing. After quite a bit of time had passed, we finally decided that we didn't want to sleep in the boat that night. We could have. It had 4 bunks in it, but as much as I like being out on the ocean, I don't really like sleeping in the boat though. I always wake up with a stiff neck, and I just don't enjoy that. I mean, who would? As I was getting ready to leave, there was this loud thud, and the boat tilted hard in one direction. Our boat was pretty sturdy, and it would have taken a massive hit in order to get it to shake so hard. My wife, understandably alarmed, ran over to me, and she asked me if I knew what that was. I told her that I had absolutely no idea, but it would be a good idea for us to get on our way in case it would happen again. And then it did. There was another really loud thud, and our boat was rocking hard once again. I looked at my wife, and I could tell that she was absolutely terrified. I was too, but I tried my best not to let it show. Honestly, however, the force of these thuds had me very, very concerned. Whatever was hitting our boat was hitting it hard enough to rock it considerably, and that meant that it had enough strength to knock a hole in our boat and sink it. And yeah, we had a dinghy, but what good would a dinghy be when some underwater force was capable of knocking our much larger fishing boat over? I got the boat started, and we started on our way back. We hadn't been moving for more than 5 minutes when it happened a third time. Whatever had been hitting us when we were sitting still was now following us and hitting our boat at full force. My wife actually had tears in her eyes, and I had a few of them too. We were both very terrified, and after the 4th hit, we were convinced that whatever was hitting the boat was not going to give up, and it was eventually going to sink our boat. I tried going faster, as fast as I could possibly force the small boat to go actually. I wasn't sure how much good it would do. I was also worried that the momentum of the boat would help the hits from down under to cause more damage, and I was scared of the possibility of the speed causing the ship to capsize. I'm not even sure today if this is a real possibility or not, but in an anxiety-riddled mind, it was something I had to think about and consider to be a real possibility. By the time the boat was hit a 6th time, we were both convinced we were going to die that night out there on the ocean. We were surprised that due to the sheer force of the hits that the boat hadn't sunk yet, but it held together. And after that hit, we braced ourselves for another. And 5 minutes passed without a hit. And then 10. And then a half an hour. Although we were relieved that the hitting had stopped, We didn't relax at all. We remained tense and scared. Hell, I didn't even want to look into the water at any point to see what was causing the hitting. I was scared as to what I might see. But it never hit a seventh time. We either outran whatever was hitting us, or it just lost interest. We didn't feel safe though until we were on dry land, and it was a very long time before either of us took the boat out again. A lot of our friends don't believe the story. They think we're just trying to create a real-life Moby Dick. But hey, the ocean is a huge place. The Pacific Ocean alone is larger than the entire land surface of the world. The sheer volume of water, and the very fact that life began in the water, tells us a few things. It tells us that there are some very, very old things out in the ocean. Things that we haven't even the slightest idea about. And it tells us these things have many places to hide.
I think the scariest thing about the ocean is how much happens out there without you knowing, and without consequence. That might not take too much sense, but it will make sense after you hear this story of what happened to me. I was out in my boat with a couple of friends, Joe, Wendy, and Tom. We were out having a pretty good day, just enjoying the water. I don't want to give out the location though, because the situation was just way too disturbing, and I don't want to draw attention to it. But we had gone pretty far out. Normally we wouldn't stay out too long after dark, but we were having a good time, drinking, telling stories, and the sky was just so clear and beautiful. If you've never seen the clear sky at night out on the ocean, then I hope you get the chance to sometime. When we were out, we were up on deck when a flash of light caught our eye. Tom went over to the side of the boat and shined one of the lights in the direction of the flash that we had seen. When he did, we saw something that really surprised us. There was a much smaller boat out there. I mean, this was a really small boat, like a personal motorboat that we would never expect people to be using in more shallow water. It was quite a surprise to see a tiny boat out. It was floating right in our direction. We tried to make contact with the boat. We figured it was unlikely that we were using radio, so we used our sound signal to blast 5 short and very quick blasts of sound towards the boat. This signal tells the other boat that you don't really know what their intent is. I mean, we didn't think they were up to anything bad. I mean, it was a small boat, but it was just weird that such a tiny boat was that far out and apparently adrift. There was no response from the boat at all. We talked about what we should do. Wendy suggested we should just leave it because whoever it was must have been up to something shady. But Tom and I didn't think that would really be a problem. Joe wanted to approach the boat, and although I was a bit nervous about the idea, I told him that if we kept our distance, we could try to get a little closer look at it. So, we slowly started to approach the little boat. We shone our lights on it, but we're not getting any sort of response from it. Although the boat was pretty small, it was adrift, so we had to be careful. Even a small motorboat colliding with a much bigger boat like mine could still cause damage. I preferred getting close to it before possibly grabbing it with a beam if needed. Can't tell you in the right words how creepy it was in the dark, watching this small and adrift motorboat just slowly coming towards us in the water. We watched it as it bobbed up and down with the waves. It was just a shadow on the vast ocean on which it was sitting. We pulled my boat up as close as I was comfortable getting to the small motorboat. We yelled over, asked if anyone needed assistance. There was no answer, but that was clearly something sitting at the wheel. We told the driver that we were going to shine our light over there on him because we were concerned. This was a precaution so we didn't blind the guy. He didn't answer, and we went ahead and shone the light over in concern. And when we did, we realized that there was no way that the lights could have hurt his eyes. He didn't have any eyes. All this man had were 2 empty eye sockets, coated with dry and crusty blood. He was obviously dead, too. Wendy wanted to just leave and get out of there as quickly as possible, but I couldn't leave a guy dead out on the ocean that way. We carefully pulled the boat close to us, and I went ahead and called the Coast Guard. It took a little while, but they came out and got the boat and took us in for some questioning. They were fine with us, not accusing us, but also not telling us much of anything either. I honestly, to this day, don't know any of the details of who that man was or what happened to him. Honestly, I'm happy I don't know anything about him. I don't need to. I remember the looks of those 2 eye sockets as the dead man floated in his boat on the surface of the ocean. A lifeless and directionless captain on a dead vessel. I don't ever need to know anything else about him.
Hi all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the button next to my orange buddy, and you'll be notified of all future content. If you're not already following Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter, please feel free to follow us both using the links provided below. If you follow me on Facebook, you'll get to experience firsthand me promising videos to be released on certain days, and you'll realize how often I'm wrong. I'd like to thank the Sinful Savant for joining me on this collaboration. He is an up-and-coming channel. Please visit his channel in the links provided and consider subscribing to his channel. Now, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a moment. When I first began narrating, I was a bit hesitant to do so. I felt that doing this would make me a copycat of some sort. There were a lot of creepypasta and true scary story narrators out there. But as I've grown and enjoyed doing so, I've realized the diversity of styles, and I feel it's important to have that in entertainment. Furthermore, I find that I really like that normal people have the opportunity to produce their own entertainment, and that websites like YouTube provide a forum for it. When I was growing up, entertainment content was controlled by publishers and producers who solely decided what was good enough for you to watch or read. I have absolutely no doubt that because of this, many people who have written good books or screenplays have never been exposed simply because someone thought that their story was not good enough or marketable. But nowadays, we live in a world where we can all publish, produce, and distribute our own work. I think it's important to have that, and it makes me happy to see people succeed in this way. And because of this viewpoint, it makes me very happy when you subscribe to the people I collaborate with, and I thank you all for doing that. I'm going to have many collaborations coming up, and I hope you'll understand why I do them, and I hope that you will enjoy both my content and their content as well. Thank you for indulging me, and please do me one last favor. Please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.